Hello, welcome to the Canada Climate Change Advisory video. Today we'll be discussing climate change and how Canada can be affected in the future, as well as providing suggestions for taking action on climate change. First, what is climate change? Climate change is the rising average global temperatures as a result of human carbon emissions. These carbon emissions cause temperatures to rise through the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is the natural process in which the sun's radiation is trapped by the Earth's atmosphere. Carbon gases are particularly effective at absorbing solar radiation. And because these gases amplify the greenhouse effect, we call these gases greenhouse gases. As humans continue to increase the emissions of carbon gases, temperatures will also continue to rise. Rising temperatures can also alter the weather, resulting in rising sea levels, droughts, and considerably more destructive storms. The changes to the Earth as a result of climate change warrant immediate action by Canada in order to adapt for the future, as well as making decisions based on looming vulnerabilities and opportunities that face the country. First, let's discuss Canada's past impacts on climate change and how Canada became such a massive carbon-emitting country today. So let's take a look at imperialism, pre- and post-industrial revolution, and current carbon trends.
When looking at an issue like climate change, it's important to note that it is a multidimensional issue. There is no correct solution to solve climate change, but there are many options. Before any change can happen, there must first be an in-depth analysis of the history of Canada's impact on the climate system, as well as taking a close look at the vulnerabilities and opportunities that will arise given the shifting climate system, and most importantly, Canada's involvement in the international community, as well as the policies Canada has implemented and instances in which these policies have been acted on. This advisory video will take an in-depth look at these issues to help Canada make the correct choices in combating climate change in the future.
I'm going to talk about the history of Canada. Canada was a colony of Britain during the early European imperialism until 1867, and channeled resources for use in Britain Imperial. The World War I imperialism was a dominant form of nationalism among English Canadians. They temporarily supported British imperialism and desired the security of British Imperial and they of the Imperial. The history of fossil fuels. Coal has been mined in Canada since 1639, and it began as a primary sources of energy for Canada until 1915. Oil and gas pushed coal out of the market. Now only 11% of coal used in Canada. After World War II, oil replaced coal as the primary energy source for Canada. Pre-industrial economy in Canada, which they are using water transportation until 1815, and after the industrialization, Canada upgraded from water transportation to rail transportation, and more resources, more fossil fuel burned, new energy and technology are exploded. Speaking of deforestation in Canada, Canada is one of the world's worst offenders. Canada is a world leader in burial deforestation, and there was a massive industry before industrialization. And the definition of the deforestation is the clearing of forests to make way for new non-forest land, such as urban development and the agriculture. In Canada, most of the forest cut down is for agriculture use, and resources development and transportation. The citizen groups. The majority of population lives in urban area. Some other population lives in rural area. Individuals with lower income, they are less suited to adapt to climate change. For instance, when people have lower income, they can't afford green car or solar power. That's why they having a lesser impact on carbon footprint. Compared to individuals with higher income, they are more adaptable to climate change because they have more money. They can travel more on the plane and fly more. They also can afford green car and solar power, so they are having a larger carbon footprint.
Now that we've got some historical background, now we can take a look at some of the vulnerabilities, opportunities, and trade-offs that Canada will face as the climate system begins to deteriorate.
I will be talking about the vulnerabilities, opportunities, and trade-offs Canada faces with regards to climate change. First off, it's important to recognize the populations affected most by the rising global temperature. The Inuit and poor people of Canada definitely face the biggest burden. The poor that cannot adapt quickly to climate change have greater risk to illness and hunger. The indigenous Inuit people that make up a great deal of Canada's north are struggling from extreme weather conditions. Hunting specifically is a major problem because it is the Inuits' major avenue for food. Continuing on with an overview of the risks and opportunities Canada faces. Climate change is complex and can offer positives and negatives in every nation. Comparing the costs and benefits will help officials make the right decisions. Here listed are 5 major vulnerabilities and opportunities that I will discuss more in depth now. More severe weather is a huge risk to Canada. The increase in temperature due to global warming affects the air pressure to cause extreme weather. This has been destroying infrastructure, and rebuilding these homes and buildings has created great economic loss. Because Canada is such a large country, different severe weather situations are happening in different areas. This makes for no easy solution to help everybody facing problems. On the opportunity side, the increase in demand for climate change resilient housing could lead to a construction boom. This could be very beneficial for Canada's economy and also lead to better adaptation that will be crucial for the future since mitigation no longer seems to be an option. The next vulnerability is more frequent droughts. Wildfires increase tremendously. It's hard to see, but basically all the colors on that graph represents fire danger. The red areas are the most at risk. The biggest problem is a lowered food production. This really affects the Indigenous and poor people of Canada. The next opportunity of warming Arctic water includes more trade routes and avenues to new resources. Natural gas and oil findings is always an economy booster. Increased city population is the third vulnerability, because the water and food shortage previously discussed gets worse with overcrowding. A large population is more at risk for illness and city hazards. The agriculture boom is the third opportunity. Canada has a very high percentage of agriculture, of 80%. The warmer weather does make it easier for many crops to grow. The next vulnerability is for the tree species in Canada. There are so many trees that cannot adapt fast enough to the changing climate. This is a big problem for wildlife. The immigrants in the north receive the opportunity of unlocking frozen resources due to higher temperatures. The new people need homes and climate change resilient development. This can lead to new skills as well as teach others about how to adapt. The last vulnerability is rising sea levels. Flooding is the major risk and could cause the global economy $1 trillion a year in a few decades. In Canada, this mostly hurts poor people because they cannot afford to pay for the damages done by flooding. The melting tundra is allowing access to resources, which calls for the last opportunity. Unlocking these resources, such as oils and minerals, is very beneficial for the nation and economy. The last thing I will be talking about are trade-offs Canada faces in response to climate change. The first is to reduce fossil fuel usage versus maintaining current output, slowing economy versus current economy. Carbon emissions are directly related to economic growth and prosperity, and capping or reducing emissions today can contribute to economic slowing. The second is to invest in green technology or use the current high carbon emitting machinery. Green technology can help combat climate change, but is expensive to create and may be less efficient than the current fossil fuel deficient technology. The third is to adapt infrastructure or maintain the vulnerable structures. Adapting is very costly, but it will be able to withstand the climate change later, which would be a good idea. Development of biofuels versus food production and trade. Biofuel synthesis requires sacrifice of materials that could be used for both trade and food. The last is protect people from the environment or protect the environment from people. This means that we could commit resources to reducing emissions or prepare to mitigate inevitable hostile climate damages.
Recently, Canada has participated in the international community's attempts to act on climate change through the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Canada joined UNFCCC in 1992. They originally committed to Kyoto Protocol of reducing GHG emissions by a basket of 6 GHGs, and also include providing and reporting greenhouse gases emissions data on an annual basis, providing resources to developing countries. Canada also involved in Montreal conferences and international negotiations. In December 2011, Canada withdrew from Kyoto Protocol with a huge fine for failure to meet emission targets. Key goal of Canadian government, industry, and professional organization is to collaborate on adaptations, determine shared priorities, addressing cross-jurisdictional issues, use and sharing resources efficiently are some of the main reasons for development. Canada provided a huge financial support to address problems of deforestation and degradation and greenhouse gas emissions through the forest and agriculture projects. Canada committed to reduce its national greenhouse gases emissions by 17% by 2020. For the poorest and vulnerable people, Canada contributed to $30 billion as adaptation funding from 2010 to 2012.
When looking at climate change on an international level, the idea of justice plays a significant role in the development of policy. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change attempted to use the idea of justice in its policies with mixed effect. So in the context of climate change, justice refers to how certain countries should carry the burden of climate change action. Many developed countries, such as Great Britain, have benefited during the imperial age at the expense of other developing nations. Because of the imperial exploitation, many developing countries are in their current disadvantageous economic state as a result. Therefore, justice refers to countries that have benefited from imperialism and are more developed while also having a massive carbon footprint should carry more burden in acting on climate change issues. Now that we've looked at justice, let's look at some suggestions on how Canada should proceed in future climate change endeavors. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change hasn't worked for Canada because Canada was a colony of Great Britain during the imperial age, and therefore the typical definition of justice is much harder to apply. Regardless, Canada should use their advantageous position to focus on climate change independently from the international community and focus on projects like adaptation and mitigation, which includes reforestation, emissions reduction, as well as geoengineering projects. Additionally, Canada should continue to assist vulnerable populations and countries around the world. When taking adaptive projects, such as geoengineering, reforestation, and emissions reduction, into consideration, there will certainly be some negative side effects. However, these negatives can be mitigated through the implementation of things such as public transportation, industry reallocation, and the implementation of sustainable energy infrastructure. We've discussed previously the issue of vulnerable groups. In this case, however, these populations are vulnerable to the economic changes brought on by adaptive programs. Children, native Inuits, the elderly, and poor are all vulnerable to these economic shifts as a result of implementation of adaptive programs. Adapting to climate change is not an easy task. Some negatives and discomforts are unavoidable. But beating rising global temperatures will not succeed without innovation and sacrifice. It's up to the present generation now to start adaptive programs, or else the discomfort that we feel now will be negligible compared to the pain that ourselves and future generations will endure should temperatures be allowed to continue to rise.
Whether we affect the weather or not, we've got to get our act together or not. Climate change happens every day. Human beings act responsibly. Whether we affect the weather or not, we've got to get our act together or not. Climate change happens every day. Human beings